First, I want to welcome you to this event and tell you a little bit about Brandon Fish. He's the Director of Community Relations for the Charleston Jewish Federation, where he's working to this event and tell you a little bit about Brandon Fish. He's the Director of Community Relations for the Charleston Jewish Federation, where he's working to this event and tell you a little bit about Brandon Fish. He's the Director of Community Relations. Hi.
We love you, Paula, but not sure we want to hear you 3 different times.
I don't know what that's about, but at any rate, Brandon works for the Jewish Federation, the Jewish.
I don't know why that's happening.
I don't know what that's about, but at any rate, Brandon works for the Jewish Federation, the Jewish.
I don't know why that's happening.
I wonder, Kara, if it has to do with the recording. Maybe we need to stop it in order to.
I think so too. Wait a minute.
There's not a person on this call that this has not happened to. We just kind of love technology.
Okay, wait a minute. Try it
Chris?
now.
All right. I just want to welcome Chris, who popped in a few minutes ago. Glad to have you.
Chris.
Welcome.
Hi.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Brandon Fish is the Director of Community Relations for the Charleston Jewish Federation, where his work revolves around advocacy and intergroup relations. Since 2017, he has served the Jewish community and the Charleston community at large through the development of collaborative fresh food distribution programs in food deserts, building meaningful intergroup relationships, and expanding Jewish communal consensus-based advocacy and civic engagement. In 2018, Fish helped found the Stamp Out Hate South Carolina to advance hate crimes legislation in South Carolina, and currently sits on several issue-based statewide coalitions. The Charleston Interreligious Council and the City of Charleston Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation Commission. The way we are going to organize today's event will be Brandon will talk about background information regarding hate crime occurrence in the United States, information about hate crime activity in South Carolina and locally, the South Carolina hate crime bill, specifics of the bill, who is sponsoring the bill, status of the bill if passed, what will be the impact if defeated, what will occur, how can we take action, and questions and answers. So I'm going to hand it over to Brandon, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you all for your interest in this legislation and your consistent support, and also your partnership on so many programs like this one where community members have the chance to engage, and more often than not with elected officials and candidates for office, and your advocacy hand in hand with those programs, I think really does have an impact on what our legislators are focused on, and just by setting the topic of discussion when you organize your candidate forum. So thank you all for the work that you do. I'm Brandon. I work for the Charleston Jewish Federation, and luckily for me, part of that role has been working on hate crimes legislation with a group of amazing organizations that have come to call themselves the Stamp Out Hate Coalition. So just a little background on hate crimes. So a lot of people don't know really what a hate crime is. So I have a little presentation just to keep me on track so I don't ramble. Let me see if I can. There we go. So you might not know this, or this might sound really simple, and you do know, but there are a couple things that make a hate crime different than a regular crime. A hate crime is committed against somebody just like another crime, against a person or property, but the key difference is that their motivation for committing that crime is bias against an entire group of people. So, if I got into an argument with my girlfriend and she was of a different minority group than me, and I got mad at her and I stole her car, it wouldn't be a hate crime just by virtue of the fact that she was a member of a minority group, because my motivation wasn't to steal the car to somehow get back at an entire minority group. Maybe not the best example. Better example, if I was to draw Joni Loves Chachi on the bathroom stall, that is vandalism. But if I was to draw a swastika on a mosque, which happened in Colombia last year, my intention is not the same, and the impact is not the same. It's a completely different kind of crime. That Muslim community is now terrified to go to their mosque. They've gotten a very clear message that they're not welcome in the community, or that there may be a group of people out there that are out to get them. And so the crimes are very different. The second thing, again, that makes that crime different is the impact on an entire community. Most crimes are committed against a single person, but when you are committing a hate crime, your intention is to terrify, and the impact is to terrify an entire community. The Mother Emanuel shooting or the Tree of Life shooting, folks for a long time were scared to go to church, scared to go to synagogue after that, scared to walk around in their own skin, and we have to recognize that the difference is intent and impact. I have a great website to share that is managed by the U.S. Department of Justice. Hold on one second. How do I get out of this? All right, there we go. So the U.S. Department of Justice is really the hub of tracking hate crimes around the country. Every year, the FBI comes out with the hate crime statistics for that year, based on information that they've gathered that's been reported, I should say, from law enforcement agencies around the country. And with this data, we can kind of track what the trends are. And here's just a couple of the different categories that are typically thought of when we're thinking about hate crimes: color, disability, race, disability, ethnicity, gender identity, race, religion, sexual orientation. One of the questions we get a lot is, how are these categories chosen? Why race but not political views? These categories are immutable characteristics, meaning that they're characteristics that are stuck with you, whether you want them or not. They're part of your unchangeable identity, and what categories are listed in most hate crimes are based on these statistics that are gathered. Who are hate crimes being committed against? And when we can look at that data, we know exactly what we need in a hate crime law. I was hoping there were stats. Here we go. So here's some stats on hate crimes. A little more than half of them are committed because of race, ethnicity, or ancestry. 22%, and this is based on 2023 numbers, are committed because of religion. 18.4% because of sexual orientation. You see the numbers here. Speaking from a Jewish community perspective, I'll tell you also that the majority of crimes committed against people because of their religion are committed against Jews, and are committed because of anti-Semitism. So this is one of the reasons why this has become such a priority issue for our communities across the country, and why it's a priority for groups like the Anti-Defamation League and others that track hate crime incidents around the country. But basically, I'm showing you all this to say this is how those categories are chosen. It's because this is how perpetrators are selecting their victims when they're committing hate crimes. So one of the arguments we get a lot is that these categories are kind of arbitrary, and maybe we can just remove one category or add on another. And these stats are exactly why we choose those categories and why they're not arbitrary. So in South Carolina, we're one of, here's a demonstration of that. We're one of 2 states in the country that has no hate crime legislation on the books. And this is a list of all the states in the country and what categories are covered under their hate crimes laws. Most of these hate crimes laws were passed around the same period of time in response to very high profile hate crimes that have occurred. And even some of the ones that have passed recently are also passed right after high profile hate crimes have occurred. One of the examples of that is Georgia, where Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and within the year, a hate crime bill was passed. And that was just a few years ago when we kind of got our start. You can see the hate crime laws vary greatly between the different states, and a lot of that is actually not a factor of political affiliations of these or political preference of these states, but actually like when the bills were passed. So a lot of the older ones do not have sexual orientation or gender identity, whereas a lot of the more recent legislation, because of the kinds of crimes that we've seen and the kind of cultural awareness that has developed about sexual orientation and gender identity, we see that the newer laws have more protections for more groups of people. And in some cases, states have gone back and added categories. But you can see here, South Carolina is one of the 2 states that has no hate crime legislation on the books, and Wyoming is the other. One of the really kind of the sad parts of this whole scenario about South Carolina and Wyoming being the only states without hate crimes legislation is that, of course, in South Carolina, we had one of the highest profile hate crimes in modern American history, shooting at Mother Emanuel Church. And in Wyoming, Matthew Shepard was killed, a young gay man in Laramie, Wyoming, who was picked up and beaten to death, tied to a fence post and left there. His parents have become some of the most high profile advocates for hate crimes legislation. And the federal hate crime law is in fact named in part after Matthew Shepard. But the state where he was killed is the only other state in the country where there is no hate crimes legislation. So in South Carolina, we've actually been trying to pass hate crimes legislation for longer than I've been around. I mean, or longer than I've been in South Carolina. I just saw when I was looking up our most recent hate crimes legislation, by mistake, that there was a similar bill filed in 2000. So for at least 20 years, folks have been trying to pass a hate crime law in South Carolina. But after the shooting at Mother Emanuel, it obviously became a much more prominent issue, and folks have been really trying to get a hate crimes law passed in a major way since 2015. And the bill's primary champion has been in the House, Wendell Gilliard, whose district Mother Emanuel is in. He's not given up on passing a hate crimes law. But we really came into the picture after the Tree of Life shooting in 2018, which was the deadliest anti-Semitic hate crime committed in United States history. Somebody motivated by white supremacist ideology, including the Great Replacement theory, believed that the Jews in the local synagogue were responsible ironically enough, for importing Muslim Americans, refugees into the United States through groups like the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and so he ventured out into a synagogue to shoot as many people as he could on Shabbat morning when there were a lot of people gathered in that synagogue in Pittsburgh. That was a big wake-up call, I think, for Jewish communities across the country. Not that this is a new sensation, but there were a series of anti-Semitic violent crimes that happened right after that really kind of informed our efforts in this arena. And in 2019, we had a big rally at one of our local synagogues where instead of having a vigil, we decided to have a rally in support of passing a hate crime law, and folks from every ethnic group, religious background, every segment of Charleston that you can imagine, there were representatives from, and including Mother Emanuel Church. And we decided that we were going to take that momentum and form a coalition in support of passing a hate crimes law in South Carolina. We all agreed at the outset of this effort that we were only going to support a legislation that protected everyone, because in other states, different groups have been stripped out of the legislation, and it was a way that they were able to separate the coalition that was working on hate crimes legislation, and ultimately produce, in some cases, legislation that wasn't particularly helpful, and excluded people who were having hate crimes committed against their group regularly, like the LGBTQ community. So we all signed on to a statement, of the same statement of support. We had a lot of local and national support, and there was a business coalition formed right at the beginning as well, with big businesses and the South Carolina Chambers of Commerce. We had a lot of momentum, and we, in the first session, were able to pass a bill through the House. It got stuck in the Senate. Again, in the last session, we started losing some of those folks that were showing up to the original fight. The business community decided to largely move their focus away from hate crimes legislation, and the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce deprioritized it, because there were a bunch of legislators that started targeting their other legislative efforts because they supported hate crimes legislation. So it's been very difficult. And last year, H 3620, which was a hate crime bill, it passed through the House. They, in the committee, tried to strip out protections for LGBTQ people. All of our groups put our foot down and said that we would not support any legislation that didn't protect everybody. And they were actually able to pass a bill out of the House that had protections, had sexual orientation, and a Supreme Court reference that made it also protective of trans people. That being said, the bill that made it out of the House and the bill that we're looking at today, it is not a comprehensive hate crimes bill. It is a penalty enhancement bill, which means that if somebody's committed a hate crime, then if they're motivated by, if they're committed a crime and it's motivated by hate, they have a charge and time added onto their sentence. We still felt that this is a very important piece of legislation to get accomplished. The other piece that was missing from the bill that we ultimately got through the House is anything that wasn't an aggravated violent crime. The bill that passed the House, the bill that is currently sitting in the South Carolina Senate now, and in the House, all these bills focus primarily on, or solely on, violent crimes. Whereas we know that actually 70% of hate crimes are nonviolent crimes, like vandalism and harassment. That being said, our goal is to get our state to acknowledge hate and hate crimes. and add this recognition to their code of laws. So the bill passed out of the House again last year, 3620. It got through subcommittee and committee in the Senate, and immediately the legislation, when it came up for debate in the Senate, something like 12 senators stood up and attached their name to the bill as objectors. And in the South Carolina Senate, individual senators have an incredible amount of power compared to the South Carolina House. So any one senator can put their name on a bill, and what that means is it goes onto the contested calendar in the Senate, and the only way for that bill to get a debate or a vote is for, in theory, a senator to stand up and ask for the bill to have special order and be considered immediately. In reality, the only senator who can do that is the Senate Majority Leader. And although we were able to get 13 or so of these senators to remove, I think we were at 15. So I think we got 13 senators to remove their names. I'm going to change this number here because it got down to 2. And we had 2 senators that were just not going to remove their names from the legislation. We met with the Senate Majority Leader, and he made clear to us that he was not going to use, he made clear that he was not going to use his authority to call the bill to special order unless a majority of the GOP caucus supported the legislation. I would assert that we did have the support by the end of session of the majority of the GOP caucus, but the Senate Majority Leader did not want to call the bill to special order. So what happened for the first, and this happened twice in a row, so for 2 2-year sessions in a row, we had a hate crimes bill pass through the House, pass through the Senate subcommittee and committee, end up on the Senate calendar, and get stuck because of objectors. And when I tell you every organization involved from all over the state, we're trying to get these senators to change their minds. Democrats, Republicans, didn't matter, and there are 2 senators that just absolutely would not remove their objection. And so in both sessions, the bill died without even getting a vote or a debate in the South Carolina Senate. As you can imagine, that led to a lot of folks losing hope in the legislation passing ever. But I would say that the primary challenges we had last session, besides the Senate obstructionists, were geographically. Whenever we try to pass a bill in South Carolina, you really need the support of each. You need support in each region of the state. Charleston, despite the fact that we all know, I'm sorry, I saw somebody from Horry County on the call, so I shouldn't make this joke, but as we know, Charleston is the center of the universe, but not everybody in South Carolina would agree, and so Charleston actually does not have a lot of power in the South Carolina General Assembly proportionately to other parts of the state. We actually get beat up a lot, and unless you have statewide support for something, it really doesn't get done in South Carolina. So we have a disproportionately Charleston and Columbia organizations, and even up and down the coast of South Carolina organizations in support of the legislation. But where we really needed more support is in the upstate. That is where we have some of the most ideologically purist senators, and there's also a lot of religious influence that shows up at the table to oppose this legislation. So that was a big problem for us. Another big problem is, as you all can see by looking around you in 2025, we are in the midst of a culture war that most of us don't want to be in. But most issues that pop up either get categorized as liberal issues or progressive issues or conservative issues, and almost immediately draw the opposition to the other side. And I think one of the big challenges that we have with this legislation is it being branded as a Democrat effort. And in South Carolina, again, nothing happens if it's just Democrats. If it's primarily Democrats supporting it, you need the support of the GOP as well. And despite the fact that the bill passed with overwhelming majority of GOP representatives in the House, and it's my belief would pass in the Senate with a majority of GOP votes, it was branded as like a liberal issue. It's still something that we're working on, and so it doesn't rise to the top of the priority list for conservative legislators. And then cynicism. I'll be honest with you. After 2 or 3 sessions in a row of hate crimes legislation seeming like it had momentum and then not passing, we lose a lot of support. We lose a lot of focus from legislators. And legislators don't want to spend, and organizations don't want to spend their political capital if they don't think that it's going to manifest in legislation passing. To go back to like the thought behind all of this, what we hear a lot in terms of the opposing arguments to legislation, to hate crimes legislation, are that it punishes people for thoughts or thought crimes. As I mentioned, these are penalty enhancement bills. So nothing new is made illegal under hate crimes legislation as it currently exists. You have to break a law, and in the case of our current legislation, a felony, violent crime, in order to be up for hate crimes charges. So it doesn't penalize. It's not a crime. It's not a thought crime bill. It doesn't punish people for their thoughts. It does enhance penalties based on motivation and impact. And while some folks will say that that's unique to hate crimes, if you think about it, so many crimes that are on the books are delineated based on motivation. 1st-degree murder, 2nd-degree murder, 3rd-degree murder, manslaughter. The difference in all of these crimes are motivation. It's a big part of law. It is often considered as aggravating factors when sentencing comes up in crimes. It is absolutely a normal part of criminal law. It is a factor that exists in a lot of the ways that we prosecute crimes in South Carolina already. First Amendment, religious freedom. My pastor can't preach the gospel without being accused of committing a hate crime because my church doesn't support gay marriage. Again, absolutely ridiculous. These laws only impact folks that have committed violent crimes, and even then, they have to be convicted in a separate hearing beyond a reasonable doubt that their motivation was hate for a group of people before they could even be subject to the enhanced penalties that come with hate crimes. So it has nothing to do with speech. We have a First Amendment for a reason, and that our First Amendment takes priority over any state law. So we can't make speech illegal, or else it would not survive any kind of constitutional test, and it would be challenged in court, as we see happening all the time with other laws. One of the popular arguments is that hate crimes privilege some victims over others, or that they're only for minorities. The way that hate crimes are worded, and I'll pull up our current moving hate crime bill here, is actually that, oh, this is not the text. Here we go. When a person commits a violent crime or commits assault by mob of the 2nd degree is defined, that's a lynching, in section, and the trier of fact determines beyond a reasonable doubt the offense was committed against a victim who is intentionally selected in whole or in part because of the person's belief or perception regarding the victim's race, color, religion, political views was added in a hearing, a subcommittee hearing for this particular bill this year. Sex, gender, national orientation, or physical or mental disability. One of the things you'll notice here, it doesn't say which race, it doesn't say which color, which religion, which sex, which gender. If you are a white, cisgendered, straight male, and somebody comes up to you and commits violence against you and says that they've done so because they hate white people and all white people deserve to die, they could be charged under this bill, under this law, if it was passed into law. It's not for specific minorities. It's for anybody that's targeted for any of these characteristics, whether they're in the majority or they're in the minority. So that's also not a good argument. Also, this is also really important. When you think about that bill that you just looked at, it doesn't speak to what category the victim is in. It actually speaks to the motivation of the perpetrator. It is based on the perpetrator's belief or perception. So it's not for specific victims. It is for specific perpetrators that are committing crimes based on their biases. So this is not a legitimate argument. A lot of people say, and this is a fair point, this law will not stop hate crimes from happening. That is probably true. But as Senator Tom Davis, a prominent Republican senator in our state, has made the argument, most of our laws are not deterrents. They are not going to stop crimes from happening in advance. That's not the purpose of laws. The purpose of laws is to prosecute people once they've committed a crime. And in large part, our laws are a reflection of our values, what we find particularly important or particularly heinous in our society. And so our state, in not passing a hate crimes law, is also sending a message about its values that is not really reflective, I believe, and we believe, of most of the folks in South Carolina. And then another one that comes up that is really confusing is we already have federal hate crime laws. We have now 17 municipal hate crime laws that have been passed since these laws have failed to pass. So why do we need a state hate crime law? And we have state laws that already prosecute violent crimes. Why do we need more laws? Federal, the capacity for prosecution of federal crimes is much lower than our state capacity for prosecution. We've got a handful of great folks working for the Department of Justice in our state that are prosecuting crimes, but they're prosecuting very high profile crimes, and they have to be selective in what they choose to pursue. Most crimes that are committed in our state are prosecuted by our state, under the South Carolina Code of Laws. So not having a hate crime law in our state means that a lot of hate crimes don't get prosecuted as hate crimes. For example, Dylan Roof was charged with murder under our South Carolina code. There was not a code to charge him with a hate crime, and it simply is not the same as a normal violent crime. The municipal ordinances only go up to misdemeanors, something like a $500 fine, 30 days maximum in jail for any municipal violation. They cover very minor crimes, so they don't cover violent crimes. They don't cover even kind of like intermediate level crimes. So they're not adequate to prosecute if somebody was beat up in the street because they were gay. Their municipal law could not really prosecute that crime effectively. And in terms of the violent crimes, again, just getting back to the disparate impact and the different intent of the crime is a reason why we need to delineate the difference between those crimes in our South Carolina Code of Laws. And as somebody, I believe Dion Tedder brought up in a hearing last week, we have laws already on the books in South Carolina that make it particularly illegal to target police dogs or election workers, or we have category or members of the military. We actually do have laws already on the books in South Carolina that provide different penalties for committing acts of violence against certain or crimes against certain groups of people. So it is not foreign to South Carolina law to imagine that. Where we are now. So just this past couple of weeks, a bill called S99, very creatively named, S99, which is sponsored by Senator Margie Bright Matthews. It came up in subcommittee really unexpectedly. What we are hearing from the House side is that they are not interested in moving a hate crimes bill forward unless they see the Senate do it first. They don't want to spend the political capital arguing about a hate crime bill and to have it pass the House only for it to die again in the Senate. So they are in large part waiting on things to move in the Senate. And our expectation was that that was going to be it, and that we weren't going to see hate crimes legislation move at all this session. But a couple weeks ago, as I mentioned, S99, which is a penalty enhancement bill for violent crimes, as was the last bill, it did come up in subcommittee. It had one key difference in that it articulated very carefully that there would be a separate hearing for the hate charge, which was important to several GOP senators, and it came up, and it was debated, and several senators who have opposed it in the last session actually supported its moving forward. It got a full committee where the Senate Majority Leader made it very clear that he is opposed to hate crimes legislation still. He made some of those same arguments that we just went over, but it ultimately passed out of full Judiciary Committee in the Senate last week by a wide margin. And most of the GOP senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee voted for it to be advanced, which, number one, I think it speaks to some progress that's been made. There were 3 senators who voted for the legislation to move out of judiciary that were opposed to the bill in the last session. And I think it also speaks to kind of the discord going on right now. If you're following South Carolina politics, the Senate Majority Leader has had a very hard time wrangling his caucus around tort reform, around vouchers, around a number of issues that were priority issues for the Senate Majority Leader. He's had a very tough time with his own party, and I think we saw that in this committee hearing as well. Unfortunately, I have to report that as of today, the bill came up on the calendar, and we have 2 objectors. So we're kind of in the same spot that we have been in the last 2 sessions, except the House has not passed a bill. So we have a Senate bill that's sitting on the calendar, and unless the Senate Majority Leader calls for that bill to have special order, or unless those 2 senators remove their names from the bill, it's going to be stuck again. In the meantime, we have successfully passed 17 municipal hate ordinances around the state. Charleston, North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, Somerville are all municipalities where hate crime ordinances have passed. Some of those ordinances have been charged, especially in Charleston, where they've recently expanded the hate crime ordinance to cover crimes. And there's all sorts of creative stuff happening in these municipal ordinances. In Somerville, there's a stipulation that somebody convicted under the hate crime ordinance can have their conviction vacated if they go through education about the minority group that they targeted or the majority group that they targeted. And so we think that's pretty innovative and productive. In Mount Pleasant, as a response to white supremacist flyering that had been perpetrated in the middle of the night against 1,000 homes in the Mount Pleasant area two times in a row. They passed an ordinance that also was really creative. It was a hate ordinance, but it was also an ordinance that basically made what they had been doing illegal. Somebody who had been at the center of those kinds of crimes, and when I mean flyering, when I talk about flyering, I mean somebody goes through a neighborhood in the middle of the night with little Ziploc baggies and with flyers in them and rocks to weigh them down, and they hit an entire neighborhood at 3 o'clock in the morning. So when those folks come out to get their newspaper in the morning, they find white supremacist propaganda in their driveway, and it makes a lot of people feel violated, unsafe, and the folks who were doing this kind of knew because that they weren't going to get into a lot of trouble, because one of them was actually caught up in Horry County, and he was given a $500 littering ticket and sent on his way, because there was nothing under the city ordinances that would allow for any kind of enhanced charge based on what he was doing. So Mount Pleasant took that very seriously, and they passed an ordinance that was a hate ordinance, but also specifically targeted that kind of activity. Where we have to go from here. So this is something I'm struggling with every day, just as an individual, but also as a professional. When we get frustrated about something not moving forward, we have to look at that as an opportunity for innovation. One of the ways that the Jewish community is doing that, along with other faith communities, is through advocating for security grants for our places of worship. We will continue to advocate for municipal ordinances. We will rack our brains to think about laws that we can pass to ensure that our state prioritizes the prosecution of hate crimes. We can support the training of law enforcement around the state to recognize and report hate crimes. Unfortunately, most of our police departments don't report any hate crimes to SLED, and that means that they don't end up in the FBI statistics that were referenced earlier. That's a major problem because we don't know where hate crimes are happening around the state. And when we cite really low numbers for anti-Semitic crimes, which just came out actually in the ADL audit, or hate crimes in general, it's because of a lack of reporting and infrastructure, not because they're not happening. We know that they're happening because we're fielding incident reports all the time at our local organization. Our Jewish community organizations around the state are getting reports, and we're seeing high-profile incidents happen, like the cross burning up in Horry County, and the vandalism of the mosque in Columbia. All of these firings, we know that there are active white nationalist groups operating throughout South Carolina, and South Carolina is also attracting a lot of hate groups because of our perceived lack of focus on the issue, and we're kind of sending an unfortunate message to white supremacists and other hate groups that they are welcome in South Carolina, or that they're somewhat safer in South Carolina. So we're working really hard to try to innovate new solutions to hate crimes as we continue to pursue this legislation moving forward. We need to court as much GOP support as possible. We have a tendency as Democrats and Republicans who have deeply held beliefs to villainize the other side, and to claim complete ownership of an issue. And as I mentioned, like the placing of these issues in the framework of the culture war only means that that we can't come to a consensus and get things done. Because if this is seen as a Democrat effort, Republicans don't want to pass a bill in this environment that will be seen as the Democrats getting a big win, right? So we need to figure out how to brand this legislation as much as possible as bipartisan, and talk about it from a GOP perspective. We're going to continue to pursue municipal and county ordinances, and most importantly, I think we need to continue to raise awareness in all of our communities about recognizing and reporting hate crimes. As I mentioned, we have such little data about hate crimes and hate incidents because they're largely not being reported to anybody, to community organizations, to law enforcement. One of the big problems is that people in our state know that we don't have a hate crime law, but they think that means that they shouldn't report it to law enforcement or the FBI. We have incredible law enforcement and FBI around the state that take these issues very seriously. And although there are places in the state where they don't have training to recognize and report hate crimes, certainly when we talk about Charleston, when we talk about our coastal communities and our large police departments, Columbia, Greenville, they are trained to recognize hate crimes, and they do take this problem seriously. And the FBI, even if they can't charge a hate crime because it doesn't reach the level needed for a federal crime, a lot of times they're building cases that we're unaware of as the public, and reporting a hate incident, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a crime at all, can help inform their investigation and lead down the road to criminal prosecution of larger crimes. So it's really important. It's really important that we encourage people to continue to report, to recognize and report hate crimes happening around us. I'll just say to close out that while it doesn't look in this exact moment like hate crimes legislation is moving, it ran into a wall, it's stuck on the calendar. If you pay any attention to the South Carolina State House, you will know that as we approach the end of the first year of the session and the second year of the session, legislation passing is all about it being the exact right moment. It could be that the Senate Majority Leader has a bill that he wants to see passed, and there's an opportunity for an exchange. It could be that, God forbid, a high-profile hate crime happens, and the state wants to move to do something about it. It could be that, like Senator Chip Campson said in the hearing last week, that it's taken for granted that hate crimes legislation is going to pass, and the people in charge want to be the people to write it the way they want to write it. But so much in our state house happens just because the right factors line up in the right moment, and there's an opportunity, and the advocates get it done. And so the important thing is to be consistent in our advocacy efforts, not to let the issue go to the bottom of the pile, because if we're persistent, when that window does open, we'll be able to take advantage of it, and the folks in our state house that are advocating for this legislation will push it through. And I think it's not going to solve the issue of hate in our state, but I think it will go a long way to codifying our state's rejection of hate against any group of people. And it's incredibly important, especially in these times where we're seeing a huge increase, speaking from the Jewish community, in anti-Semitism, but especially in just the rhetoric that we're seeing around the country as it relates to a number of minority groups. It's really important to them. It sends an important message to them, and it sends an important message to the folks who would commit crimes against people because of who they are. That our state is not a state that welcomes that kind of behavior and that kind of crime, and is firm in its rejection of it. And I know when I've been talking for too long, so I'm gonna stop and answer any questions that you might have about hate crimes legislation with people working on it. I will also forward everybody. I think that the full committee hearing that happened in the Senate last week was they spent about an hour debating the hate crime law and the hate crime bill, and it was probably the longest series of debate that happened in the South Carolina General Assembly on hate crimes the entire time that I've been focused on it. And you can see a lot of the arguments against that we talked about, a lot of the arguments for, and it's really informative to see which senators support, which senators oppose, why they support and oppose the legislation. And the judiciary is a particularly large committee that everybody wants to be on. So you can, for a nerd like me that pays very close attention to the South Carolina legislature, it was an opportunity to see how 20-something senators, what their position was on the bill, so that as we start to look at what the dynamics are in the fuller Senate, we have a much clearer picture of who's for and who's against, and kind of where those divides are. And I'll send all that to say I'll send you all that link, and if you have an hour, it's a really good watch. That I encourage you to check out, including the Senate Majority Leader speaking at length about his views on the legislation, which he in this hearing called an attack on our culture, which was a little disturbing to me. But I hope we can change his mind.
I mean, that begs the statement that the attack on discrimination culture, the attack on prejudicial racism culture. I mean, that's kind of hilarious. Brandon, I cannot thank you enough. We'd like to be respectful of the time. Maybe if I do want to ask a question, and maybe we could take another quick one. Is it significant that we know who those two senators are who are objecting and will not? Does that matter? And because in our approach, should we try to get them to change their mind, or do we continue to affirm those who are in support of?
So I don't think that there's anything we can do to change those two senators' minds. One of them has been an objector each of the last 3 sessions, and I've heard accounts of very heart-to-heart conversations with him where it's just very clear that he is not going to be moved on this legislation. And so I think, to your point, I think maybe energy is better spent on moving everybody else and working on the Senate Majority Leader and the leadership of both chambers, because ultimately they're the folks that we're going to need to move forward, whether or not those two senators are objectors. We need them to make it a priority.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right, that answers. Does anybody have another question? I think if you do, I mean, I've got all of y'all on my screen. If you'll just unmute yourself and we can go. I mean, my mind is a whirl with trying to retain it all, and it's an extremely powerful commitment that you guys are doing. Does anybody want to add anything? Well, Brandon, the Charleston League is a member of the Stamp Out Hate Coalition, correct?
Yes, ma'am. And I would just also encourage everybody to lean on your state folks. Lynn Teague up at the State House is one of the most talented lobbyists in the lobby, and just about anything that I know, I've either learned from Lynn Teague or could have learned from Lynn Teague. So, definitely ask her for advice, whether it's on hate crimes or any other legislative issue. She knows everything I know and probably 100 times more.
We agree.
I have a question. It's kind of tangential, but are you hearing anything about universities in South Carolina being targeted in the way that some of the others are around this anti-Semitism issue? Or
It's a great question. South Carolina has been an exception, I think, in a lot of ways. Well, I shouldn't say that, because I think, like media in general, the loudest voices and like the scariest imagery is what gets the attention. So I think probably a lot of what we see in terms of anti-Semitism on campus is coming from not every university. It's a cluster of universities that a lot of these high profile protest events have happened at that have, in some cases, manifested in incidents of anti-Semitism. In South Carolina, at the college, as far as I know, there hasn't been a single reported incident of anti-Semitism as related to all of these protests. And at the University of South Carolina, there's been a couple of small incidents, but nothing that would be newsworthy, to be honest. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think to folks have asked me why I think South Carolina in particular has enjoyed kind of a reprieve from some of what has been happening elsewhere. And I think number one, I think we have less student activism. Unfortunately, there's definitely. I'm happy about less anti-Semitism, but I think I've heard that there's less student activism at the college and at USC than there are in some of those northeastern schools. And I think also there's just a general. I think that, well, I think a lot of things about this issue, but I think one of the things that Columbia got wrong, just to use one example, in terms of their response to anti-Semitism and in general, like a lot of the things that were happening on their campus, is that they didn't enforce the existing rules that they had. So when crimes were being committed on campus, when windows were being smashed, and students were being, in some cases, physically intimidated, the university wasn't suspending students. They weren't enforcing the rules that they already had on the books. And I think once those groups that knew that the rules weren't going to be enforced, then they had no reason to hold back. And I think in South Carolina, there was a lot of clarity right from the beginning. All the schools made statements just about that certain things were not going to be tolerated, and I think that's resulted in less kind of general chaos in South Carolina. But I could be wrong. I'm a bit removed from the college scene.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the input tonight. Just, I think if all of us go out and reach about 4 or 5 of our own team and, find our people and talk about this, then that'll be a way to inform and educate. I don't think this will be the last time we turn to you, Brandon, for some expertise and for some more information. And we're very grateful that you were here tonight and that you shared your time and your extreme wisdom in this. Anything you want us to know, send it to our way, please, because we want to be not just in name only a coalition partner, but an active coalition partner. So help us, if you will.
Anytime. And the number one thing I can ask all of you to do is when you have your candidate forums, ask a question about this. When you talk to legislators, ask them a question about this. Just keeping it in the public conversation, I think is what we need to do right now. And there's not a lot. There's not a whole lot we can do to make this happen immediately. But again, it's a slow. I think it's going to be a slow, persistent effort that results in this happening when the window opens just right. And so just keep it at the forefront if you can when you're talking.
Can I ask one more thing?
Sure.
So the municipalities in South Carolina that have passed this, do they pass it with consistent extra penalties, or do they all come up with their own formula?
So it's an interesting question. I think most have passed it with the same kind of language, but a couple have gotten creative, and that's good and bad sometimes. In Somerville, like with that education piece, I think that's great. And in Mount Pleasant, they're responding to specific circumstances. But it's actually the difference in the legislation throughout the municipalities makes for an interesting argument for conservative legislators who like uniformity in law around the state, and it presents an argument to the state that that they should standardize the state's response to hate crimes as opposed to allowing every municipality or encouraging every municipality to pass a different ordinance.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
One thing I wanted to mention, and it's kind of an add-on with what's been happening in Washington, the school that's been protesting, and it's not huge numbers, but more so than other South Carolina schools, is Furman. They've been in the, and so that's that doesn't surprise me, but I think sometimes people overlook Furman.
Well, I've definitely talked to some of the activist groups on campus that are pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian, and I have been really pleasantly surprised by the students at the college. I can speak to the college more than I can speak to USC. They have engaged in a lot of cross-cultural dialogue. They've worked with each other to try to keep environments from feeling unsafe for students. So I have to give some credit to really great student leadership at the college that although they're having protests on campus on a number of subjects, they have generally tried to do so in a way that that makes everybody feel welcome and safe. So got to give it up to them. They're really impressive young people.
Thank
Well,
you, Brandon.
I appreciate it so much. We all appreciate it. And, I think we'll have maybe a little thought process in our sleep tonight, thinking about what all we've heard and just how can we process it and formulate a plan that would be supportive of what you're doing. And we are very grateful for you and your community and would
Well,
like to participate. We'll continue.
we're grateful to y'all.
So thank you very much. All right. Well,
Yeah.
we are going to give you a thumbs up and say thank you so much.